I'm going to take us up to about 20 days before the ground offensive actually started. We didn't know when it was going to start, and our guidance was to be prepared on the 15th of January. That was the commander's guidance, that we would be prepared to go full bore on the 15th of January. On the 21st, 27th of January, 1st Marines was still getting gear off the ships. On the 23rd of February, Task Force Ripper was still mounting these Israeli track-width mine plows and rollers that had just come into country. So with our initial guidance of being ready to go on the 15th of January is generally true, but we were bringing in the combat excavator, the ACE, and tons of equipment as we moved into from about the 15th of January to right up until we kicked off the assault. The majority of forces had flowed in, had come in by the 15th of February. The air war was to start on the 17th of January. There was only 2 people in the entire division that knew that. It was General Myatt and myself as the 3. And we almost had one of these Winston Churchill Coventry decisions that we had to go through because we wanted to make sure the enemy knew that we had forces far enough forward that he would not conduct a spoiling attack and uncover our logistics bases that were building up a little too far north for safety comfort initially when the air campaign started. So we had taken the entire LAI battalion and sent it up to basically from the heel to the elbow over here off of this sheet map. We sent them up on the 15th of January knowing that full well that war was going to start and the LAI battalion's not going to know it. And our concern was not that the LAI battalion would do something stupid. Our concern was that all the various types of Allied aircraft that we have are going to see LAI or LAVs on that desert floor right on the Kuwaiti border and think it's a target. The fire support coordination line was in fact the Kuwaiti border. There's a berm that separates it that's very visible, a high berm, in some places a double berm, and it's over 10, 12 feet high. And it's on the Saudi Arabian side. The concern is that we're going to take friendly fire, and I will get into that here in a second. But on the 17th, the air war started, and LAI battalion had been up there and stayed almost the entire time. Well, about 10 days prior to the division's movement into its assembly areas, which would be right off of this map, down here in the corner, we took Task Force Grizzly and moved it up there and gave it a screening mission for the division and allowed the LAI battalion to come back, rearm, refit, and take a break. So that's the first time that now infantry, foot mobile, although we did have our tows and our heavy weapons, foot mobile infantry up running the screen mission that in fact had been run so well by the LAI battalion. But they needed a well-deserved rest. As you know, and I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was about the 29th of January, the LAI battalion, the Iraqis did launch what they thought was going to be a spoiling attack into Khafji, and a tank brigade off of this elbow corner all the way down and trying to get out between the police posts. There's police posts about every 15 clicks up there, and it looks like a building out of Beaugest. It's looked like a French fort, you know, with the towers on it, and those are in fact border guard stations. Our reconnaissance battalion had OPs in all of those, and the LAI battalion was operating in and behind those areas. But where those police posts are, there are gaps in this big berm. And that's where the Iraqis had to come through because they can't get across those berms. And in fact, LAI battalion held off basically an armored brigade up there. They had 72 tanks, They got intermingled with them on one side of the berm, us on the other side of the berm. TOW missile shots taking place at very, very close range. As a matter of fact, within 50 meters of this police station, there's a T-62 tank sitting there that was killed by not only TOWs but the Dragon missiles that and AT-4s that the recon folks had. But he had a hell of a good spoiling attack on the elbow side, which got very little publicity other than the fact that the LAI battalion took what we think was a Maverick missile from an A-10 and killed everybody in the vehicle. I think there was 11 killed in that. Very tragic, but and you don't want those kind of things to happen, but in fact, LAI battalion was in close contact at the time and felt that they needed the air support that came in. But he attacked out of the elbow down through here, trying to come out in the 3 police stations that were down there, as well as sending the entire 2 brigades of the 5th Mechanized Division down through the coastal road into the Kafji, at which we had 2 reconnaissance teams that got isolated inside the city. And this was very well publicized. The battle for Kafji, the Saudis, and there's a whole host of GCC forces in there, Qataris, Omanis, other forces, Moroccan. We had 300 of the Mujahideen out of Afghanistan in there, Bangladesh, and you could go on, you name every country out there. Most of us would have trouble finding them on a map. They were all over. They all bugged out when that mech brigade first came. Our recon team got isolated, and the reason I want to point this out is because we had started a cross-training program with the Saudi Arabians National Guard, the SANG, the King Abdul Aziz Brigade of the SANG, way back in October. And this is one of these things that as Marines, you know, sometimes we don't think there's going to be much come out of it. This was one that was in every cloud there's a silver lining. Colonel John Admire, Brigadier General Select as well, that had 3rd Marines, was in charge of our cross-training program. And after the Saudis initially bugged out, Colonel Admire went up with a couple of members of his staff, found Colonel Turkey, and said, "We have Marines in Kafji. You need to go back in and retake the city." And because Colonel Admire had built up a 3-4 month relationship with Colonel Turkey, Colonel Turkey said, "If there's Marines in there, we'll attack." And in fact, they went in there. It wasn't fancy. They took a lot of casualties, but what was important about it is it built the Saudis' confidence sky high that they had in fact defeated the Iraqis on the battlefield, and they defeated a mechanized brigade that was in Kafji. They captured a large number of prisoners, and their confidence was sky high. The other factor is that Iraqis blew their cover, that if in fact he could attack with a mechanized brigade down the coastal road, then that coastal road is open. And this became a big factor in the play of the EPAC forces, the Eastern Province Area Commander, the Saudi Arabian forces on our flank, because we did not feel all up until this time that the Saudis would attack and protect that left flank, and we were concerned about it the whole way up. Brings us into about 10 days prior to G-Day. The logistics buildup, which is astronomical for those, and Rick Sherrill, a duty expert on all this stuff, can tell you that when you see infantry battalions in a 5-tank company tank battalion and a full 4-company LAI battalion, the logistics for these guys is astronomical, and it boggles your mind to know how much buildup they need and how much space they need to tactically employ these guys in an open environment. And we were concerned we had to get our logistics up forward. So the buildup for CSSD-10, which was the main logistics base, was right directly across the border. I went to General Myatt and asked for permission to move Task Force Grizzly into Kuwait, because the train from the Saudi Arabian side goes down to the berm, and then it rises back up on the other side. So about 4 or 5 kilometers into Kuwait, you can see everything that's taking place in Saudi Arabia. You can see 30, 35, 40 clicks in there. So before we built up in there, I had asked for permission to move us forward, and permission was given, and we moved into, on about G-9, we moved 10 kilometers into, or excuse me, 5 kilometers into Kuwait and put out a screen so that we could deny the enemy the observation, so he'd have to get inside us to be able to see this logistics buildup. On G-5, for whatever reason, and still to this day I do not know why, it took us so long to get approval to have our reconnaissance go in. We had been waiting and waiting for our recon battalion to get permission to cross the border. There had been no force reconnaissance activities in Marcin's zone. I know of no force reconnaissance activities that took place. There were some Army activities further inland, but as far as I know, there was no force reconnaissance prior to our own reconnaissance going in. The reconnaissance mission was defined as identifying, let me get this correct because it came back to haunt us in mission requirements. They had used aerial photography to identify potential gaps in the minefield, because he had attacked through this thing. He had to maintain this minefield. He had to have gaps in there, and we had not had any good aerial photography that we could determine where the gaps were, but there was enough photography that you could assume where a gap might be. An example, you could see from aerial photography that one unit's barriers and obstacles were totally different from the ones on the right flank or the ones on the left flank, which would lead you to believe that maybe 2 different units put those in, and they in fact left a gap between the 2 for maintenance. But anyway, the mission for the reconnaissance element, and this is again a foot stomper, and the reason I'm highlighting it, said go to this position and observe the gap, and then item in for item on what kind of mines are in there, what depth are they, what's enemy activity, etc., etc. They went to 3 positions, one in Grizzly's zone, one in Ripper Papa Bear's zone, and one in Taro's zone. They went in on G-5, they came out on G-3. We had, because we were there, we had the opportunity to immediately debrief them. The 2s got down there, sat down and talked with them at the police post, and after 3 days of waiting, there was not a gap in Grizzly's lines. They did not identify one. They found one in Ripper's zone, but Ripper's going to do a mechanized breach, and now you give it one of these. I should have had a V8. Why did you even bother giving him a zone? Just let him do a basic area reconnaissance, because he's going to do a mechanical breach and he doesn't need a gap. They also found a gap in Taro's area. We'd assumed all along, and the old saying, if you assume something, you make a you-know-what out of you and me, that we would find a gap. And so now here we are on G-3, and we don't have a gap. With a little quick head work and thinking, then we will go do it ourselves. We have the assets. We have very highly trained regimental scouts. I had gone in and briefed General Myatt that we wanted to start our infiltration mission on 0001 on G-2. The reason for it is because we would now have, and we were going to be the first ones in, we now would have 3 periods of darkness to be able to get forward and identify that gap. That was approved. The MEF commander gave me mission type orders: don't start the war early, and off we went. On G-2 at 001, we in fact moved up all of Task Force Grizzly, 2 battalions forward to within visual sight of the first obstacle belt. It was about 20 kilometers into Kuwait on a zone about 15 kilometers wide, and then put in teams during the day. Basically, they went up, buried themselves in the ground so they could observe directly in, and then the guns and vehicles stayed off behind. And then at night, the tows, using their night sights and other equipment, would move forward to observe. We trying to find a hole through here. The using reconnaissance elements that we did have in our scouts as well to screen our flanks, because our flank on the 2nd Division side was open because 2nd Division was not going in that early as well. We get to the point where we have position, folks in position. 2-7 is discovered 15 hours after we had moved in, which I was very pleased about. 3-7 was not discovered until 36 hours, just prior to G-Day. So we had 2 full infantry battalions in his face that were not discovered, and that is a credit to those 2 battalion commanders. But the intent was, we had heard through the 2 channels, we had not gotten any line crossers out of here. We had heard, most of the folks that had given up were over here and over on the other side, so we didn't know exactly what was in there. The line crossers were all saying the morale was low. So what we wanted to do was take advantage of that, to get in front of him, get right in his face, use artillery and air, which would be the first time air had prepped this area, because if you'll remember the strategic campaign, the shaping of the battlefield was all in these units further north. These units were not taken under fire until we moved in and had already moved in to Kuwait. But now we're going to get up close and personal with this guy and make sure that he knows that something, Allah is not with him today. That in fact, every time he moved, he got wrap-round artillery fired by 312 at him, or he had air run on him that was controlled by our folks up front. And then, after that strike, we would play PSYOPs tapes. We used only surrender appeals. The PSYOPs from the Army were Humvee mounted. They were backed off so that you couldn't see them, but you could hear them. These 20,000 watt speakers would blare, you know, you better surrender, you know, the boogeyman's coming to get you. They were about that simple. And we continued this for a 3-day process. The night of G-2 now was going to be our reconnaissance, our point reconnaissance. We're sending engineer reconnaissance elements as well as battalion stay and regimental scouts physically into the minefield. Measure how far the mines are apart, etc., and do those things that the reconnaissance had not been able to do for us. Big time lesson learned in a foot stomper here. Unbeknownst to me, and I can say this of my boss, General Myatt, because he has come back and told me that it was in fact his decision. He forgot to tell me in the heat of the battle. He had made an agreement with the 3rd Marine Air Wing that in fact the fire support coordination line, which was now this obstacle belt, that they could come down, and as long as they stayed north of the 1st obstacle belt, they could in fact run air inside the fire support coordination line. I didn't know about it. We get forces forward, and all of a sudden I'm getting calls saying we can't contact this air. The air's flying over, it's coming in on us, it's getting close, and within 800 meters at one time the air is going, and it takes us a better part, a couple of hours during the evening, because we had to wait till it got dark, that in fact some hollering and screaming on the radio, it comes down that in fact that was the agreement. We had already pulled our reconnaissance elements out of there to prevent them from getting hurt, and we've lost a night. So now we're going into G-1 without finding a gap. The important point of that is that in the shaping of the battlefield, as it moves down all levels, it's got to be understood at all levels exactly where the air is running, who's controlling it, and what was an understanding between General Myatt and 3rd Marine Air Wing. If I had known that, we probably would have done things differently. But that was a well-learned lesson that could have been fatal. To us, it was a problem, because now we do not have an opportunity to probe that minefield. During that night of G-1, while this is happening, Task Force Terrell does move forward into their zone and is in assembly areas prepared to move forward. Our missions for the 2 infiltration regiments were to, in fact, infiltrate through the minefields, get in behind the enemy, to eliminate any direct fire threat to this mechanized breach. The commander's intent and guidance was, I have failed, Grizzly and Taro have failed in their mission if Task Force Ripper or Papa Bear loses one tank or one track to a direct fire weapon. And so that's pretty heady guidance. So we wanted to get in there early. The reason that guidance was given is because we knew this was going to be fairly lightly defended. This obstacle belt, the second one, was going to be very heavily defended. And in fact, he needed all that combat power to be able to roll forward and bust through. Because if he lost his 100% redundancy, then the mission for the whole division could get sacrificed on that next mine belt. So Taro and Grizzly had basically the same mission. Prevent direct fire into the mechanized breach, as well as ensuring that the mechanized breaching forces did not have to dismount their infantry to clear out trenches. Speed. You've got to have that speed. If we slowed down in there, we knew as a division that this was a fire sack. That all of his artillery was registered between those two. He'd catch us in there, seal off with fast cam mines, the back door, hold us at the front door, and then we're in a fire sack. Speed was of the essence. Get Ripper and Papa Bear through as fast as we can. So Taro has a lane identified. We do not. What we did is we changed our scheme of maneuver that day. Lieutenant Colonel Tim Hannigan was the focus of main effort. Most of you know him. Superb battalion as well as superb commander. He and I sat down at 10 o'clock and said, it's no longer an infiltration. We have an infantry assault on a fortified position with a minefield in between it. And we sat down there in the middle of 20 kilometers of Kuwait, called all the key players in from 2737, and we held a key players rehearsal on the scheme that we had developed out there. At 1500 we ran that rehearsal, and at 1500 on G-1 was the first time that 37 was discovered. His forward units that were controlling air and artillery on the defensive positions were discovered, and we started taking some incoming during our rehearsal. Decided to move the rehearsal a different location. So on the night of G-1, these two infantry regiments were supposed to begin, at the commander's call, their infiltration. At about 1700, Grizzly and Taro get a call from General Myatt, and it says, you now have an on-order mission to launch the infiltration. And what had happened, unbeknownst to us, I did not know the reason, you folks did. The President of the United States decided to give them the full time to withdraw. He was not going to launch any assault until the decision was made at 12 noon on the 24th, which would have been 2000 G-1, the 23rd of February for us. So we could not launch our infiltration until 2000. And at 2000, we still hadn't gotten word, but Allah was with us. As we moved down to prepare, we had already moved down our heavy guns, and we were preparing for an assault breach. And with this air artillery directly, personally on these Iraqis in the defensive position, about a Iraqi company and ultimately the elements of a battalion started surrendering. It starts getting dark, they're surrendering. The Iraqis are firing 4-deuce mortars on their own people. We had taken some casualties trying to get these guys out of the minefield, but he's walking through this minefield. So Tim Hannigan hands a couple of chem lights, not him personally, his scouts, a couple of chem lights to the Iraqis and said, hey, you guys know how to get through here, let's mark this thing. And so the Iraqi POWs, in fact, marked the lane through the anti-tank minefield that we did not know existed. And it was a good-sized lane. New problem. The Iraqi prisoners tell us that there's an anti-personnel minefield behind them that they didn't know where a lane was, that had been put there specifically to keep them from retreating. There had been death squads, and as you probably heard in the intel reports, there had been quite a bit of executions and things taking place on people deserting. They put a minefield behind their own people And now for an infantry force, we have even a harder problem. Anti-tank mines aren't going to go off with us. As a matter of fact, one innovative young Marine from 2-7 decided as he's pulling, we had little weapons carriers with carts that we used to pull our heavy weapons and ammunition, and also evacuate casualties as we did our infiltration through this minefield. He thought this would be really neat. Step on those mines as you go through. Step on the anti-tank mines you use to pull the item through. And he in fact did that. We have an anti-personnel minefield behind us, and through some absolute heroic efforts from Staff Sergeant Restivo from the Engineer Reconnaissance Unit, they went in and the Smith and Barney, they earned their money the hard way. They got on their hands and knees and probed through this anti-tank or anti-personnel minefield. Got a lane, quickly moved 2 infantry battalions through that lane once we'd gotten permission. Terrell has great success over here, no enemy contact. This side is not defended. So on G-Day, as the first light comes up, Ripper has moved from their assembly areas up to, and they're at 0600. He crossed the, hit the initial minefield that had been marked for him at 0601. 1 minute off a mechanized task force movement, and I know Rick would be impressed with that because he had moved about 35 kilometers to get there. Bust through here. While he's busting through, we started taking probably about 72 to 100 122 millimeter rockets, which were about the main thing he shot at us, were the rockets. He gets in and moves very quickly through the breach. Papa Bear was off of his tail end and did not get the approval to go through until Ripper had moved all the way up to the second minefield and was prepared to go through that second minefield. And then in fact, Task Force Papa Bear created 4 lanes, 2 because he didn't have all the assets, 2 lanes per battalion and 2 cutback lanes. So now the division has 12 lanes through the first minefield and starts a huge Herculean effort to move 5 artillery battalions in so that they can support the attack on Jobber and in fact the Papa Bear's movement. Quick sidetrack here that in fact what we think of traditional artillery employment, where you have each regiment has a DS battalion, we started out that way and knew all the way through that that was not going to happen. We in fact had 3 artillery battalions in firing for Task Force Grizzly. We had 312 initially, then 511, and then 112 as we moved further forward. As these artillery battalions leapfrogged so that we always had 3 battalions prepared to fire and 2 on the move for this entire evolution. Papa Bear, in fact, moves forward, so on, and Ripper moves up. Papa Bear says, I'm ready. Ripper says he's ready. They both go, and at 1600, Ripper had moved through, had quite a good battle in and around the Burkan oil fields, which cut off this corridor. And by G-Day, at the end of G-Day, Ripper had isolated the MEF objective, which was the Al Jaber airfield. Papa Bear had moved up initially into this battle position, but oriented with a large number of forces this direction because we were concerned about the remainder of the 5th Mechanized Division. And Shepard had moved forward, and we had 5 artillery battalions, 3 of them inside between the 2 barriers, and 2 of them set up on the other side. G+1 takes place. The scheme was, in fact, for Grizzly to move up, relieve Ripper from their isolation mode here, and go into a mount exercise to secure Al Jaber airfield. Papa Bear and Ripper then would move off on these flanks. What happened that day is that it was very, very foggy. You literally couldn't see but about 50 meters. And while Colonel Hodry was sitting down with his CP on this side of the barrier and his tank battalion on this side, they in fact, as the fog was lifting, they were sitting having a commander's conference, and a T-62 tank drives up within about 50 meters of his CP and says, I'm the battalion commander for these 72 tanks. I want to give up, but I'm not sure about those other guys. And right at that time, boom, a main tank gun round comes flying right through his CP, and all hell breaks loose. And we are in the middle of what became the Iraqis' only counterattack. They came down from and out of the Burgan oil fields, which we didn't think they could do because they're burning, and you'll see that here in a minute. Out of the Burgan oil fields, towards the Division CP and Ripper, and as well the 5th Mech coming in from the flank into Task Force Papa Bear. 1st Tank Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Mike Kephart did a superb job. He took his 3 tank companies, swung them onto the flank. It was very easy to disguise because you couldn't see anything, and in fact attacked the flank of this tank battalion. Had a pretty good fight. At that time, the skies lifted. After the tank battalion had maneuvered into position, the skies lifted, and you could see forever. And now he's got a tank battalion on his flank, he's got Cobras in his face, and they in fact eliminated about 2 brigades, armor brigades, in basically a turkey shoot, because once you get on their flank, they were in pretty much a bad position. And the other thing, as you can see, not too much heads-up work, that he was maneuvering with a minefield on his flank, so he couldn't go anywhere. He really had the tanks, the tank battalion had him right where they wanted him. Division CP called in some LAIs, and they, in fact, LAVs, they in fact chased off the tank battalion that was going after the Division CP. All along, this did slow down the entire movement. Task Force Grizzly was unable to move through this 2nd obstacle belt and get into position until about 1500 that day. What was going to be a 2-battalion attack into Jobber ended up starting out with 3-7, the focus of main effort, and he had to take the entire sector for the task force. And as we end the day, Taro is still in screening this flank, and Papa Bear has now moved into position here. Grizzly's here, and Ripper has moved up very close to phase line red. At about 1500, when we were supposed to continue the attack, the wind changed direction. First time in about 9 months that we got a southwest wind, and the wind started blowing up this direction. The oil burning here and here totally obliterated daylight. At 1500, you had to use a light to read your map. You could not see, and as soon as it got dark, it was the darkest night I've ever spent in my life. We went through about 4 mock drills. Pucker factor was high. You go to, I wear glasses, I take my glasses off, I set them down, I put on my gas mask, I'm all set. Take off my mask, I can't find my glasses. Really, really dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We stopped, we hold up the attack into Jobber. We were concerned about it being booby-trapped, and NVGs, nothing worked. So at G-2, or G+2, this whole assault started again. Ripper, Papa Bear, Shepherd, which was to run all the way up in here and secure this flank, because we were concerned about EPAC forces being able to keep up with us. In essence, they did. And with us going into MEF Objective Alpha. So on G+2, Ripper and Papa Bear, Ripper moving north, Papa Bear holding back on the inside, because if he was going to counterattack. 2nd Division's on this flank. We were only concerned about this flank, so we wanted to hold Papa Bear back, so if he came through, we'd let him go after Ripper and then get Papa Bear on his flank. In essence, he didn't do that because, as you will see in this short video we'll get here in just a second after a quick break, that the 3rd Armored Division and the 3rd Corps and what was left of the 7th, 14th, and the 27th Infantry Divisions and the 5th Mechanized Division were all trying to get down this one road right here, phase line green, and out past an escarpment, a very narrow road here, and 3rd Marine Air Wing, Marine Craft Air Wing went after them, and you will see the destruction that took place. It's absolutely